And now I think it's time that we focus on our theme. I'll ask George Kefalogiannis, our economist at the Greek Entrepreneurs Association, to whom he had a very hard time putting this presentation. We tried to simplify it, but to make it understandable, because this will be broadcast on YouTube and other media. So let's start, George. Before we do our analysis, and don't worry, I'm not going to have a Fidel Castro speech here. It will be very brief. It will be, I think, 5 slides. But before we do the analysis, I have to throw you some raw data. If you see on the left, we have the first one is the digital competitiveness ranking. As you can see, the obvious. The obvious is, go back please, the obvious is that Europe, in comparison even with the United Kingdom and Singapore and Switzerland, but USA, for China we don't have reliable, but we all know how the Chinese work and use digital skills. We are very much below. Greece, even lower. That's the first raw data I will throw at you. The second one is the debt as a percentage of GDP on the far right. This, right now, Europe seems to be in a very good position. We are one of the lowest. Okay, Greece is the highest in this chart, but it's the fastest, the nation with the fastest reduction of its debt, which speaks a lot about what has happened especially the last 5 years. So we have also Italy. We have a representative of Italy here. But Europe is good. But Europe is good now. The way things are going, because of 2 factors that I will explain, welfare spending and defense spending, the projections of the IMF, and we will focus on Europe, is that, as you see, there's a spike of debt to GDP ratio in 2020, which was obviously the COVID. And then this thing was reduced, but now we're going back to the COVID era, and we're going there because of reasons we will explain in a bit. I'm just throwing you raw data. And the other chart that is very, very interesting and says it all, I would say, is if you look at the GDP growth of the United States, as opposed, this is a straight line, which is the top line is the US, in case you cannot read them. I cannot see the colors from here. You see the big difference cumulatively, what has happened since 2010. The States grew by 31%, and Europe grew by 17.5%. And even worse, the productivity growth. You see how the United States, despite the issues and some issues the last 4 years, look how much cumulatively they've increased the productivity. Productivity is the fuel of the economy. It's not just a number. And in Europe, we are really, really low. Okay, so we have to put all those things together and talk about them. Let's go to the last data, raw data. Actually, the one before last. This is something that Kostas Theos will appreciate. That's his area of expertise. The depreciation rates. Look at Europe. Of course, Greece is the worst. We keep saying this to the government and to the wider political spectrum. We understand the reason why we're here, but this has to change, especially as we will talk shortly about high-tech investments. These high-tech investments, as Theodoropoulos, the president of the Greek Federation of Industry, says very correctly, what sort of depreciation is that when the high-tech investments that Europe needs, not just Greece, within 3 years, it's outdated. You have to do another investment. So, and you still have amortized only 30% of it. But it's interesting, if you look at the other countries, how much, in some of them that they have very high depreciation rates, like Finland, Which one else is high? Denmark. These are very prosperous and really very energetic economies, okay? It's not just that factor, of course, because we have other things that play like digital skills, but the depreciation rate is very, very, very important. And Europe, as the consensus was with all our speakers last night, where we hosted them for dinner, is that Europe needs investments, and needs investments yesterday, okay? And to reduce those, to increase those depreciation rates, it's the best investment that European governments can do. Let's go to the last raw data slide. Now, look, this is Germany. Germany, and Dr. Habeck will have a lot of things to say. He was in the middle of it for many years, being the vice chancellor, but also in charge of economics in Germany. Look at the chart. We have a spike like with other countries in Europe, but Germany is the strongest economy, as you know. We have a spike that went to 31%, the welfare expenditure. Welfare expenditure is related really, as we will see, to the low birth rate, as there is a shrinking workforce, but is more directly related to the pensions. And look at Germany, which is despite the low growth right now, it is the engine of Europe, basically. Look at the spike as a percentage, okay? We will have to deal with this. But Germany, who has finally become and is taking the role it deserves, a leader of Europe, and we hope that France, despite its current political crisis, will follow, because the German-French axis, and this is something we will deal in our chat with Martin Sandbu. We hope that this axis will be re-energized because it has been deactivated for different reasons, but Dr. Sandbu will explain those things better than me. Anyway, Germany, because the last 10 years I've spent defending, in Greece at least, they say, oh, your ideas are great about marginal taxes, but where have they been applied? And I told them, of course, why do they need to be applied somewhere? Why don't you judge it on the merits of the proposals? And then, thank God, help came from Germany, because we have the first two cases, aside from other growth enablers that I could also qualify as marginal taxes enablers, but in Germany, these two are very closer to what we're talking about. The first is a bold measure that the new government, the Merz government, took. It's a use of marginal taxes, where basically if you work more as a pensioner, you have zero tax. So the add-on income is taxed zero, a marginal tax. Of course, and that's why it was a bold measure, and of course it was really courageous from Chancellor Merz to do that. It has a cost, this one. It's gonna cost about 850 million to 1 billion to do this. And the reason why is because people that are working, retirees, they're already being taxed. But it was a bold measure, and it is a marginal tax. The second one, and that was the big surprise, it's a measure that was enacted and introduced by the previous government, of which Robert Habeck was a main pillar, was a measure where basically, in order to induce people to work more in Germany and produce more GDP, therefore the debt to GDP ratio, I will explain that in a minute, it will be reduced. It was to reduce compensation tax for hours worked beyond, overtime. To my nice surprise, I knew he must have been involved because he was involved in economics in Germany. But to my nice surprise, humbly, Dr. Habeck told me yesterday that that was his idea. And I said, well, bingo, that's great. We're very fortunate at Greek Entrepreneurs Association that we have the man that introduced, he didn't call it marginal taxes, but it is a marginal tax. And this measure, by the way, when you induce people to work more, but it does not affect existing public revenues. Anyway, the point is that Germany, which faces similar problems as the whole of Europe and is taking its leadership position, and we're very happy about that, is the ones that show the way. So next time they ask me, especially in Greece or in other countries, where have they been applied? I will say Germany, okay? But we want them more to be applied. So let's go now to the heart of the presentation. Don't worry, it's only, I think, 3 slides, right? Yeah. So let's go, now that you have this raw data and background, let's go to the analysis. We have 3 interrelated EU challenges. EU is lagging behind USA and China. We all know that. I don't want to teach or to pretend to be us or our association professor or something to teach you basics to anybody. We try to simplify this so that people, even laymen, can understand this. We have a vicious loop, and people have to understand how this vicious loop works so that the medicine that we propose or other measures that may come up from this conference can be proposed. I'm talking about specific measures. The heart of the problem is the debt to GDP. We have to move, we have to understand how this thing increases, which is bad, okay, and how we can decrease this ratio, or at least keep it the same level while welfare spending, by necessity in a transition period, and defense expenditures increase the debt. Low productivity, the second biggest challenge, the fuel, that is no fuel in Europe enough, and then the shrinking workforce. We all know, we all talk about the low birth rates in Europe, and then there's this debate about immigration and so on and so on. But immigration is also something that is a direct result, not just of desperate people mostly trying to come to Europe, it's also a response to the need of shrinking workforce. And I'm glad to say here, small parenthesis, that some governments have started striking the right balance of bringing people from outside of Europe in this transition, but not for them to necessarily grow roots in Europe, because there is a reaction, whether we like it or not, from the people in Europe. In any event, these are 3 interrelated challenges. The low productivity. Why do we have low productivity in European Union? First is the low AI digital skills. We saw the charts earlier. And secondly, as Greek Production Association would say, in order productivity, especially in this age, is not just related to the people who are manning the factories. It's also related to the capital expenditure on industry mainly. If you go to Netherlands right now, and you will see Netherlands, would you have expected Netherlands to be good in machining? I wouldn't. I say, why would they do that? I mean, China is better, right? And we also, as Theon, we've been using Far East, but you walk into a machining shop in Netherlands, you don't see one human soul in there. So that tells you something. You need also CapEx to complement AI skills. In any event, the results of all those 2 factors is a low GDP output per person, which reduces growth and by consequence increases the debt to GDP ratio. The second one, the shrinking workforce, is due to mainly 2 things: low birth rates and desire to work less. Let's face it, I come from a different generation, and many of you also. The Z generation doesn't want to work too much, okay? It is what it is. We have to face that. We have to give them incentives to work more. But the way it works here, the effect on GDP, is we have those two things. You have to understand, this is key. Those two things just lead to higher pension spending. We have less and less people working to cover the pensions of more and more people. We all know the problem. And of course, this increases fiscal spending. We saw in Germany and in other countries, of course, we're gonna go to the COVID era in terms of this percentage as a percentage of GDP. This increases fiscal spending and therefore increases the debt to GDP ratio. Okay. So these are interrelated problems. One feeds the other. On top of that, the usual loop, we have extraordinary events in Europe and in the world. First of all, we had COVID, and secondly, now we have Ukraine war and the increase in defense spending, which, of course, they increase fiscal spending, and therefore, they affect the debt to GDP ratio even more. So that's the situation today. Let's go to the next slide. So today, that's why it has become more international and to debate, not to accept our proposals, but we want to debate. And if somebody comes with a different solution and everything, we'll be very happy about that. We need to attack those things as Europeans, not just for the Greek situation, which Greece is doing very well, one of the best growth areas in Europe, but we have to attack Europe in Europe at a European level, because me speaking as a Greek, we know very well how vulnerable is the Greek economy if things go bad globally. So here we have to fight with a virtuous loop as opposed to a vicious loop. The way we propose to do it, again, for debate, we don't know everything and we may be wrong, is use of a tool set of marginal taxes that basically allow GDP to rise by efficiently taxing growth, reskilling, upskilling, high-tech capital investments differently to avoid any other form of outright tax reduction for the existing public revenues. Whether we like it or not, the public revenues, which in Greece was a sacred cow and still is, of course, in Europe also it's becoming a sacred cow because we are reaching very high debt to GDP ratio. So, however, you cannot fight this by increasing taxes, of course, because then you're dead in the water. You're gonna face China and the US where the taxes are low with a very big disadvantage. The question is to keep the taxes, and this is a prerogative of each different country, but somehow to induce this extra growth by taxing this extra growth, this extra effort differently. This is what we are proposing. So we will talk about this, the virtuous loop. Now, regarding extraordinary events and defense spending, this is something honestly, I didn't want to cover because I am in the defense sector and I didn't want to give the wrong impression. But however, it does affect in a big time and we cannot hide behind our finger. But the question is, how negative is the effect on the debt-GDP ratio? Are there positive spillover effects to GDP growth? And how can we make defense spending, which is the main driver, along with welfare spending, that is, pension spending, how we can make it less onerous on public finances? I will say here, just because I'm not going to touch this subject anymore, I'm going to leave it to the session of Ms. Goulart. And we have also, I forgot to mention in my opening speech, we have also representatives from the SME Association, ASD, the European Defense Association. We also have Ms. Papandoniou, who is at the European Commission dealing with the thorny issue of defense spending, how we can integrate Europe. In any event, I can only say, and I would appreciate if Mr. Habeck has something to say. We see something very interesting in Germany. Again, I'm not trying to say that defense spending is good. No. What I'm saying, and what we're saying, is that in Germany, for instance, the defense spending has allowed defense companies to absorb all the excess capacity of, for instance, of car manufacturing. We saw a major German company, a defense company, that bought at a very big premium a company that had software and tools that were used exclusively by the car manufacturing industry, right? Why? Because the car manufacturing industry has sensors, as you know, in all your cars, has sensors, has AI a little bit, it's digitized. And they bought this company, which otherwise would have less revenues, in order to put them to use. Plus, of course, the tremendous effect of the R&D spending on producing new products that end up in the civil market. But that's not my area, or it will not be my area, but we have to deal with this issue as well. So let's go back to the last slide. I think it is the last slide, George, right? And tell you very concretely what we propose. The first, of course, is we want to have reduced marginal taxes. Marginal taxes are very important. Is the difference between making or not making investment. Is the difference between paying €1 more or not to your colleagues when you're an employer. In Greece, for instance, we have the horrendous negative marginal tax rate, which has nothing to do with social security expenses. People don't understand this. If you want to have somebody get €1 more of net pay in their pockets, it costs us in Greece at a level and above €3. This is what we call in Greece το μη μισθολογικό κόστος, non-salaried costs, okay? This is a prime example of a negative marginal tax rate. Anyway, here we want to create positive marginal tax rates. And let's start with the virtuous loop to counter. The first one is GDP growth. This is the Germany first come and first enabler. We want to have reduced marginal tax on, this is at the European level we're talking about, on voluntary overtime and retirees employment. Okay, this is what Germany started. We believe that it's a very good measure to counteract, to increase the supply of working hours on the problem of low birth rates and desire to work less. Have the people who are retired work more. Anyway, medical advances, as you know, allow people, a person at 50 or 60 today, thank God because I'm 65, they're not the same like they used to be, even 20 years ago, okay? We have more energy, we have better medical, we can work more. And of course, we have to counteract what the Z generation, which has less incentive or does not want to work as much, we have to give them this incentive. This, of course, it will work by increasing the GDP supply, and therefore it will decrease the debt to GDP ratio, the first green arrow you saw there. And again, I'm sorry for the oversimplification, but we cannot make it even more simple for people to understand how those things work. The second one is about productivity. What do you do about productivity? Again, what we propose is we have, and this is really the most important thing as far as we are concerned in the Greek Entrepreneurs Association, but also the other association, is zero marginal non-wage cost for salary increases after certified digital and AI skilling and reskilling. What that means, and I will explain that mostly for our honored guests from abroad, what it means is that if, in simple terms, if I, as an employer, what happens is an employer will not give salary increases just like that, especially when you have such negative marginal taxes. They will never do that. They will only give it if there is a productivity gain. The problem is the chicken or the egg? Who does the first move, right? Because in order to have productivity gain, you have to invest in reskilling, upskilling, okay? So what we're saying to our government, but also now we say that at a European level, we're saying, okay, let's do the following. Let's break this impasse. Somebody has to move. Give us the incentives to retrain our own workers, give them specific salary increases, I will explain why, so that we can reward them for this extra effort on being enthusiastically involved in reskilling, upskilling. Revolutions in that area, in digital and now AI, do not happen because somebody says from the top to the bottom. They happen because the people from the bottom to the top, they are very enthusiastic about doing it. Why should they do that? Why should they sacrifice family life? No matter what we as employers reduce the working hours to give them time for training, why should they do it if they don't have an incentive? And this incentive, it will be paid, that's what we propose, from the employers, but for that, just like with the 2000 of Chancellor Merz, there has to be at least zero taxation. Again, the big cost that makes the €1, €3, it's not the social security charges, for which the government has done a lot of generous and bold moves to reduce them. The problem is moving from one income level to another income level. And we have a very high negative tax rate, and I'm sure it's the same thing everywhere in Europe. So the question is, how do you isolate this part, these salary increases, you isolate it and you tie this to something that will produce productivity gains. So the employer will have to take the risk to say, okay, once you complete your reskilling, which by the way has to be certified, because for the government, but also for the employer to be protected from any schemes that we have a superficial reskilling, upskilling, somebody like the big 8 firms, like we do with the balance sheets here in Greece, somebody has to certify. And thank God there are a lot of private sector companies that would certify, and they would not dare say something that has not happened. Okay, so what we're saying here is give us zero non-salary costs. It will be like extra income that does not get into the taxation, in the tax statement of any taxpayer, okay? It will be like a sacred cow there, no taxes there, no. But this does not affect the existing tax revenues. This is what governments need to understand, okay? There is no risk on existing public revenues with this scheme. Okay, so the second one, of course, is what we said about accelerated depreciation rates, especially for high-tech CapEx investments. I heard from Dr. Martin Sandburg yesterday, and I would be glad to cover that with him. In the UK, at some point, in the previous Conservative, they were even given 130%. Can you imagine this? Give you the ability to invest and get 130% in 1 year, if I get you right, Martin, and he will explain that. I mean, come on. We don't ask this kind of thing, yeah? We ask in Greece for sure, it has to go 10, and then 40 and 40, and in the whole of Europe, they have to give incentives for people through depreciation rates to take place. And so this productivity attacks, this approach attacks this problem, which in turn will increase the GDP and will, therefore, it will decrease the debt to GDP ratio. And finally, our starting point, and I will not belabor the point further, is the reduced marginal taxes only for company profits over and above previous year's profits. Man, I had so much hard time to explain this to some people at the Ministry of Finance, and I understand them. They are very worried anything that can put in danger, anything that somebody can go around the ropes and play with this thing. What we told them is, look, take any, and we say that to Europe now, take any measurement you want. Last year's profits, the average of the last 3 years, whatever suits you. Increase it by the GDP growth for the year that you want to apply the taxation, increase this, and then if you have, like in Greece we have, which is a low tax rate for companies, we must admit that, and if it's, let's say, the effective tax rate is 23 to 28% depending on dividend distribution, have only 10%. This is a measure that induces people to invest more, to show more income. We all know also in Southern Europe that we still have a black economy. It has been addressed to a big extent the last few years, and especially in Greece, but we still have a black economy. These are incentives to work, for people to work more, to produce more, to declare more. So that's it in a nutshell. And of course, this is like a bazooka, which attacks and induces GDP by taxing growth differently. That's it. I spoke more than I should have. I apologize. And